When my father married Julia, I was 19 and quietly furious. I didn't say much back then. I was the kind of son who kept things to himself, the kind who smiled politely while resentment boiled just under the surface. My mom had died 3 years earlier after a long and ugly battle with cancer, and I watched my father turn into a shell of himself. He worked more, drank more, spoke less. He stayed on the road, jumping from city to city for business, and left our Seattle home feeling more like a museum than a place where anyone lived. And then, out of nowhere, Julia appeared. A woman nearly 15 years younger than him, soft-spoken, elegant, always calm. Calm. I didn't trust her. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, always a little too perfect. Or how she looked at me with those quiet, unreadable eyes. I wasn't a child, could see what she was beautiful, poised, and smart enough to slide into my father's broken life. Like she'd been waiting for the chance. I was away at college in Boston for most of their early years together, so I didn't really know her. I visited once a year Thanksgiving, sometimes Christmas, and we exchanged pleasantries like strangers stuck at a dinner party. I always felt like a guest in my own home. Julia never forced conversation, never asked about my life, and never acted like a mother figure. Not that I wanted her to. There was something about her I couldn't figure out. She never talked about her past, where she came from, or what she wanted. She just existed beside my father, always smiling, always sipping tea in the mornings, and wine at night, floating through the house like some graceful shadow. When I graduated, I came home for the summer. Dad was overseas again. He'd taken on a long-term project in London and left Julia to manage everything back home. I had plans to find my own place, get a job, start real life, but I needed a month or two to reset, save some money, figure out my next move. So I ended up crashing in my old room while Julia stayed in the master bedroom down the hall. It felt strange, the two of us living alone together under the same roof. Like actors playing roles we never auditioned for it at first. It was all routine, polite mornings, short dinners. She cooked well, always making enough for two, even though I offered to handle my own meals. We rarely made eye contact, and when we did, it was brief, almost awkward. The air between us felt heavy with all the things we never said. But that changed one night. It was a rainy Thursday. It's one of those long, wet nights where the sky won't stop crying and the whole house feels like it's sighing with loneliness. I came downstairs around 11 p.m., planning to grab a bottle of water and head back to my room. I wasn't expecting to see her. But there she was, sitting alone in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing a thin gray robe over her nightgown, with a half-empty bottle of wine and mascara streaks under her eyes. She looked fragile in that moment, more human than I'd ever seen her. She didn't flinch when I walked in. She just looked up at me like she'd been waiting for anyone to notice she wasn't okay. I hesitated, unsure of what to do, then slowly sat down across from her. She poured me a glass without saying a word. It was the first time we shared a drink, the first time our walls cracked just a little. She told me she was tired. Not sleepy tired, but soul tired. Tired of the silence, tired of pretending. She confessed she hadn't felt loved in a long time, not even by my father. "He's a good man," she said, her voice shaking, "but he left long before he got on that plane." I didn't know what to say. I just listened. And for the first time, I saw her not as my stepmother, but as a woman, a lonely, hurting woman who had no one to talk to. No one who saw her anymore. Her vulnerability hit me like a slow-moving storm. There was no flirting, no intention, but there was something between us that night. A shift. An invisible line that had quietly moved a little closer. And then, without thinking, she reached across the counter and lightly touched my hand. Just a gentle touch, but it felt electric. I didn't pull away. The rain pounded harder on the windows. Thunder rolled across the sky like a warning. We sat there in silence for what felt like forever. I could see the sadness in her eyes, the kind that didn't come from one bad night, but from years of being unseen. And I realized I'd been wrong about her. She wasn't some gold digger or ice queen. She was lonely. just like me. Eventually she stood up, her robe falling gently around her legs, and walked toward the hallway. She paused in the doorway, turned slightly, and said softly, "Don't stay up too late." There was a faint smile on her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. And then she disappeared into the dark. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by her voice, her eyes, her touch. She was just my stepmother. It's what I kept telling myself. But something had changed. Something I couldn't explain. And deep down, I knew that night was just the beginning. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It was the kind of summer storm that made everything feel slower, quieter, like the whole world had curled in on itself to listen. After that strange night in the kitchen with Julia, something shifted between us. Nothing had happened? Not really. But the air felt different, heavier. I started to notice little things, like the way she tied her robe tighter when I walked into the room, or how her eyes lingered on mine a second longer than they should. She still cooked dinner every night, still sipped her wine in silence. But sometimes she played music, soft old love songs that made the house feel more alive, but also lonelier. On the second night of rain, I found her sitting on the back porch under the awning, legs curled beneath her, glass in hand, watching the storm roll through the Seattle skyline like it was telling her secrets. She looked beautiful in a quiet, haunting way, like a painting that made you feel something you couldn't explain. I joined her without a word, bringing my own drink, and we sat together as the sky wept over the city. She asked me about Boston, about college life, about girls I used to date. I told her stories, the funny ones, the reckless ones. She laughed in a way I'd never heard from her before, unguarded. I asked about her past, where she grew up, what she dreamed of when she was my age. She hesitated, but told me bits and pieces, small towns. It's a hard childhood, an ex who broke her down before she ever met my father. There was sadness behind her smile, but also strength. She didn't need saving. She just needed to be seen. We talked for hours, the kind of talk that doesn't feel like talking. It felt like connection. And when she shivered a little from the wind, I offered her my hoodie. She pulled it on slowly, smiling, and said it smelled like rain and aftershave. I didn't know how to respond. I just watched her, feeling something dangerous start to bloom between us. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her on that porch barefoot, lips red from the wine, wearing my hoodie, her voice soft in the rain. It was the first time I stopped seeing her as my father's wife and started seeing her as Julia. Just Julia, a woman. And that scared me more than anything. The third night, the power went out. The storm had knocked out a transformer nearby, and the house went dim around 8 p.m. Julia lit candles long, tall ones she kept in a drawer for emergencies, and the whole living room glowed with this golden, flickering light. It's beautiful, in a strangely romantic way, like something out of an old movie. She opened another bottle of wine, and we sat on the floor with a blanket and a small speaker playing soft music. I don't even remember what we talked about. It wasn't about words anymore. It was about looks, glances that lingered, touches that weren't quite touches. At one point, she leaned her head against my shoulder, and I didn't move. I couldn't. The way her body fit against mine felt too natural to write. Her skin was warm, and her hair smelled like vanilla and something floral I couldn't name. My heart pounded like it was trying to warn me, but I didn't want to be warned. Just wanted to feel. Then she looked up at me, not with confusion, not with guilt, but with this strange mix of longing and fear. Our faces were inches apart. I could feel her breath, soft and slow. My hand moved on its own, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Her eyes closed for a second, and when they opened again, I was lost. I kissed her, gently, hesitantly, waiting for her to stop me, to push me away, to remind me who we were. But she didn't. She kissed me back, deeper, hungrier, like she'd been holding her breath for years, and finally exhaled. Ah, that kiss changed everything. It wasn't just passionate. It was pain, loneliness, desire, and guilt wrapped into one overwhelming moment. We pulled apart, both breathing heavy, eyes wide, like we'd just stepped off the edge of something we couldn't climb back from. She stood up quickly, shaking her head, whispering, "This isn't right. We can't do this." And then she disappeared into the hallway. I sat there, stunned, heart racing, lips still burning from hers. I didn't sleep that night again. I just kept hearing her voice, seeing her face, tasting her kiss. I knew we had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed even if we tried to pretend it never happened. The storm finally stopped around 3 a.m., but inside the house and inside me, the storm had just begun. Everything felt too quiet, too dangerous. And yet, even with all the guilt, all the confusion, I wanted her. And I had this terrifying feeling she wanted me too. It happened 2 nights after that kiss, and to this day I still wonder if it was fate, weakness, or something darker that pulled us together. After the storm passed, the days felt strange, too quiet, too still, like the house was holding its breath. Julia and I barely spoke. We avoided each other, walking around like two people carrying a secret too heavy to put down. But the silence was louder than words. We both felt it, this heat, this ache, this thing growing between us that neither of us dared name. Then came that Saturday night. It was unusually warm, with one of those golden sunsets that drapes over the Seattle skyline like a painting. She asked if I wanted dinner on the back porch, just something like grilled vegetables, wine, maybe music. I said yes, even though I knew I should have said no. There was something dangerous in the air, and I could feel it in the way she moved. Slower, softer, like she was stepping into a memory she didn't want to end. She wore a long, loose dress, hair tied up in that messy bun that made her look both elegant and undone. I couldn't stop staring at her. And the worst part, she knew it. She never said it, but her eyes said everything. It's the way she looked at me, along searching stares. Like I was something she wasn't supposed to want, but couldn't stop craving. We sat under string lights, eating and laughing over silly things. She made fun of my college stories, teased me about being too serious. For someone so young, I told her she was too guarded for someone so beautiful. She smiled at that, this real soft smile that made my chest tighten. We danced, barefoot on the patio, slow and close, the kind of dance where no one's watching but everything is felt. Her body was warm against mine, her breath near my ear, and I could feel the way her heartbeat sped up when my hands found her waist. We didn't say a word. Words would have broken the spell. We just danced until the song ended and then stood there, locked in something deeper than just attraction. And then she stepped away just a little and whispered she was going inside to get more wine. I followed, not even thinking. Couldn't leave her, not in that moment. She walked into the kitchen, barefoot on the cool tile, and I leaned against the doorframe, watching her pour another glass. The silence was thick, full of everything we hadn't said. She turned slowly, met my eyes, and time seemed to slow. I crossed the room without a plan, just instinct, pulled the glass from her hand, and set it down. Then I kissed her. It wasn't like the first time. One was deeper, slower, filled with all the tension we'd buried for days. She kissed me back like she had been holding her breath ever since that night in the rain. Her hands found my face, my hair, then my chest, pulling me closer, like she needed me more than she needed air. My hands moved along the curve of her back, memorizing the shape of someone I was never supposed to touch. It was wrong, yes, but in that moment, it felt more real than anything I'd ever known. She whispered my name once, like it was both a warning and a prayer. But she didn't stop me. Not when I lifted her onto the kitchen counter. Not when our bodies pressed together like we'd done this 100 times before. Her skin was soft, warm, trembling under my touch. She gasped in two. My mouth and the sound broke something inside me. I wanted her, not just her body, but everything. Her pain, her secrets, her story. She was no longer just my stepmother. She was a woman who had been drowning in silence for years, and I was the one who finally saw her. Under the candlelight, we lost ourselves in each other, in shadows and touches and soft broken moans that echoed through the quiet house. Afterward, we didn't speak. We sat on the floor, backs against the cabinets, breathing hard, both of us staring at nothing. She wrapped herself in a blanket and leaned her head on my shoulder. I reached for her hand and she didn't pull away. We stayed like that for a while, two people caught between guilt and desire, knowing we had crossed a line we could never come back from. I wanted to tell her I didn't regret it, but I didn't. I didn't know what was worse, what we'd done, or how much I already wanted to do it again. Eventually, she stood up without a word and walked down the hallway, closing her bedroom door gently behind her. I stayed in the kitchen long after, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat echo in my ears. I knew this wasn't just a fling, or a mistake we could bury. This was the beginning of something darker, something addictive. And deep down, I think we both knew that one night wouldn't be the last. The real damage wasn't the act itself. It was what came after the silence, the wait, the way we'd never be the same again. I didn't sleep that night, again. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, remembering the way she looked at me right before everything changed. I told myself this couldn't happen again, that it shouldn't happen again. But I also knew I didn't want it to stop. Asterisk. The morning after didn't feel like regret. It felt like reality finally catching up with us, slow and cold like fog rolling in after the fire dies. I woke up in my bed, but my body still ached. With the memory of her touch, her lips, the way her body fit against mine like we had done it 1,000 times before. The sun poured through the window, too bright for what we had done, like it was trying to expose something shameful we had no excuse for. I stayed in my room most of that morning, walking in circles, replaying every second from the night before. The way her breath hitched when I kissed her, the sound of her whispering my name, the way she trembled as I pulled her into me. I couldn't forget it, even though I knew I should. Around noon, I finally came downstairs, unsure what I would find: anger, regret, silence. But Julia was in the kitchen, like nothing had happened, hair brushed, coffee in hand, soft music playing in the background. She looked at me once, then turned away, just like that. No words, no sign of what we'd shared. I stood there, frozen, watching her act like we were still strangers. But I could feel it, the energy between us thick and unspoken. She handed me a mug of coffee, didn't touch my hand this time, and said softly, "Your father called this morning. He'll be back next week." That one sentence hit me harder than I expected. It was like a clock started ticking in my head, a countdown to the end of whatever this was. I nodded slowly and sipped the coffee, burning my tongue but pretending I didn't feel it. Julia didn't look at me again. She moved around the kitchen like she was trying to keep her hands busy so they wouldn't reach for me again. I wanted to speak. I wanted to say something real, but I didn't know what was real anymore. So I just asked if she needed help with anything around the house, and she said no, her voice careful, distant. That whole day felt like walking through glass barefoot. Everything hurt. The silence between us, the way we avoided looking at each other, the way I could still smell her on my skin, like she hadn't fully left me. That night, we didn't eat together. She stayed in her room, door shut, light under the crack. I stayed in mine, restless, frustrated, aching for her again, but knowing the line we crossed had a weight neither of us knew how to carry. But then, around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my door, slow, uncertain. My heart jumped. I sat up, but they passed. They didn't stop. She walked past my room, down the hall, and out onto the back porch. I waited 5 minutes, then followed. She was standing outside in one of those long, soft sweaters that barely reached her thighs, holding a glass of wine and staring at the stars like they had answers she needed. I stood beside her, said nothing at first. She didn't look at me, but after a moment she whispered, "I didn't sleep last night." Her voice cracked a little. I kept thinking about how right it felt and how wrong it was. I nodded slowly, watching her chest rise and fall. I know, I said, my voice quiet. But I can't pretend I didn't feel something real. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes shining with tears she wasn't letting fall. You're not a boy, she said. You're a man, and I see that now. But that scares me. I stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat between us again. Why? I asked. She swallowed hard. 'Cause I'm starting to need you. That broke something in both of us. The next second, our lips met again. This time slower, sadder. Like two people falling into something they didn't know how to stop. We kissed under the stars, long and deep. But this time there was more pain in it. More desperation. It wasn't just lust now. It was something more dangerous. Something tender. We ended up in her room that night. It wasn't wild like before. It was slow, emotional, almost sacred. We undressed each other carefully, like unwrapping something we didn't deserve. She cried after, curled against me, chest rising and falling against mine. This isn't just about sex, she said. Voice barely audible. This is something else. I nodded, brushing her hair back. I know, I whispered. And I did. It wasn't just desire anymore. It was a kind of love neither of us had planned for. And we both knew that made it even more dangerous. As we lay there, tangled in sheets and silence, the thought we were both avoiding crept in. My father would be home soon. This couldn't last. Not like this. But in that moment, I didn't care. I just wanted her. The way she looked when she smiled with her eyes closed. The way her body curved into mine, like we were made for each other. I knew I was falling, fast, deep, and I had no idea what kind of damage that fall was going to do. The days that followed were a mix of stolen moments and heavy silence, like we were trying to live in a dream while knowing it was slowly turning into a nightmare. Every morning, Julia would act like nothing had happened. Coffee, quiet, smiles, chores, and every night we ended up in each other's arms, tangled in sheets, whispers, and promises we didn't dare speak out loud. We were living two lives, one in the daylight, where we avoided eye contact and called each other by name, and one in the dark, where we held each other like we were the only two people who understood what it meant to fall into something so wrong and yet feel so right. We became addicted to the feeling. The way her fingers would slide across my chest, the way she gasped when I kissed her neck, the way she moaned into my ear like my name was the only word she could say. And I loved her. Not in the shallow, boyish way I used to fall in love. Back in college, but in a way that scared me. I loved the sound of her laugh when she forgot to be guarded. I loved how strong she was, how vulnerable she let herself be only when the lights were off. I loved the broken pieces of her and how she trusted me with them. But underneath all of that was the shadow we couldn't outrun. My father he called more often now, counting down the days until he flew home. Every time Julia spoke to him, I watched her eyes dull. Her voice changed, got softer, more polite. Like she was playing the part she had been cast in, not the woman I had come to know. She never smiled on those calls, never laughed. She just nodded, said things like, I miss you too, and the house is fine. And then hung up and stood still for a long time, like the weight of it all was finally catching up to her. I tried to ask her about it once, about their marriage, what it really was underneath the surface. She didn't answer right away. She just stared out the window, arms crossed, and finally whispered, he married me because he wanted something perfect to show off, not someone to love. I didn't say anything, but my chest tightened. 'Cause deep down, I think I already knew. Julia was beautiful, but she wasn't just some trophy. She had depth, sadness, secrets, and I'd seen them all more than he ever did. Then came the night we let our guard down too much. We'd spent the whole day pretending to keep our distance. But once the house was quiet, once the lights dimmed, I went to her room without thinking. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. She opened the door like she was already waiting for me. We didn't speak, we just kissed. And that night it was more than just passion. It felt like goodbye. We both knew what was coming. My father was flying in the next morning. We tried to forget that for one more night. We made love slowly, like we were memorizing each other, like our skin was the only place we could hide. She cried when I kissed her stomach. I kissed her tears away. I told her I loved her, and she said it back, but her voice cracked like it hurt to say it out loud. We fell asleep in each other's arms, naked under the covers, breathing as one. But we didn't wake up alone. I heard the voice before I opened my eyes. A sharp, guttural shout from across the room, my name, angry and loud, full of betrayal. I sat up, confused, still tangled in Julia's body, and saw him. My father, standing in the doorway, his suitcase still in his hand, eyes wild with shock and rage. Julia gasped and pulled the blanket around her, shaking. I couldn't speak. Neither could she. The room froze. Time froze. My father didn't yell again. He just stood there looking at us like we were strangers, like the air had been ripped out of his lungs. Then he turned and walked away. No words, no fight, just silence. That silence hit harder than anything he could have said. Julia sobbed, quietly beside me, face buried in her hands. I reached for her, but she pulled away. What have we done? She whispered, and the sound of her voice broke me. We both knew it wasn't just about being caught. It was about the pain we had caused. The damage we couldn't undo. That day was the end of everything. My father left the house before noon. Didn't say where he was going. Didn't take anything but his car keys. Julia locked herself in her room and didn't come out for hours. I sat alone on the back porch, staring at the garden she used to. Water every morning, wondering how something that felt so beautiful could hurt so many people. I didn't regret loving her, still don't. But love isn't always enough. Sometimes love comes at the wrong time, with the wrong person, in a world that isn't ready for it. And that day, we learned that truth the hardest way possible. The house felt like it was holding its breath after that night. Like even the walls knew something had been broken that couldn't be fixed. My father was gone, but his silence hung in the air, heavier than any words. Julia didn't come out of her room for 2 days. I'd stand outside her door, hearing the quiet rustle of movement, her soft crying, and every now and then I'd whisper her name just to remind her I was still there. But she wouldn't answer. I think part of her hoped that if she stayed in that room long enough, everything would go back to the way it was. That somehow the truth would fade and we could erase what had been exposed. But it was too late for that. When she finally opened the door, her face looked different, hollow, tired, like she hadn't just lost my father, but a part of herself. Her eyes met mine, and there was no more pretending. "We can't do this," she said quietly. Her voice didn't shake, but I could see the storm behind it. I nodded, even though it felt like something inside me was tearing apart. "I know," I said, and it was the first time I ever truly hated those 2 words. That day she started. Packing, drawers opened, closets emptied, the sound of her folding clothes more painful than any goodbye. I helped her, even though every folded shirt felt like a farewell, every closed suitcase a nail in the coffin of what we had. She was leaving, not just the house, but me. I didn't beg her to stay. I couldn't. I loved her too much to keep her chained to a life full of shame and silence. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned gold over the hills, we sat together on the back porch one last time, just like we had in the beginning. No wine, no music. Just silence and the sound of the wind brushing the trees. Do you think it was all a mistake? I finally asked, needing to hear her say it wasn't. She turned to me, eyes full of sadness, but no regret. "No," she whispered. "It was real. Maybe the most real thing I've ever felt. But real doesn't always mean right." I wanted to kiss her, to hold her one more time, to press her against me and pretend the world would understand. But I didn't. I just took her hand in mine and held it, like that small touch could freeze time. And for a moment it felt like it did. That night we didn't sleep together, not in that way. We lay side by side in her bed, fully clothed, not touching, just breathing. It felt sacred, like a funeral for something beautiful. We didn't speak. We just listened to each other's breath, memorizing the sound, the rhythm, the final closeness. In the early hours of morning, she turned to me and whispered, "Promise me something." I looked at her, eyes blurry with sleep and sadness. "Anything." She placed her hand on my chest, right over my heart. "Promise me you won't carry guilt for loving me." It wasn't wrong to feel. It was only wrong to hide. I nodded, and a single tear rolled down my cheek. She kissed it away, and that was our last kiss. Soft, slow, full of everything we couldn't say. When the sun rose, she left. I watched her drive away from the porch, standing barefoot in the cold morning air. She didn't look back. And I didn't expect her to. Love, when it's forbidden, leaves scars, but it also leaves lessons. After she left, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a memory I couldn't touch. My father returned weeks later, quiet and distant, his eyes never meeting mine. He never asked for an explanation. I think he already had his own version of the story, and maybe he didn't want to hear the truth. We lived like polite strangers after that, sharing space, but never really sharing anything else. And that was fine. I didn't blame him. Didn't blame anyone. Sometimes things happen that don't fit into the rules we've been given. And sometimes the people we're told we shouldn't love are the ones who see us most clearly. Years passed, I graduated, moved to another city, built a life, dated other women, tried to start over. But no one ever felt quite like her. No one ever made me feel seen the way Julia did. Sometimes, when I walk past a gardenia bush or catch the scent of jasmine in the air, I think of her barefoot on the porch, laughing with a glass of wine, or crying quietly in my arms, loving me even. When the world said she shouldn't, I never heard from her again, but I didn't need to. She had left something behind. Not shame, not regret, but a deep knowing that love is never black and white. Love is gray and complicated and sometimes incredibly painful. But that doesn't make it any less real. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever loved someone you weren't supposed to, if your heart once crossed a line that your mind told you not to, don't hate yourself for it. Sometimes the most powerful kind of love is the one that forces you to face yourself, even if it doesn't last. She was just my stepmother, until that one night changed everything. And even now, after all the time, all the distance, all the silence, I still remember the way she looked at me when she said goodbye. And I still love her for it.